Hello and welcome to the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast, hosted by the Permaculture Education Institute. My name's Morag Gamble. I'm so delighted to welcome to the show today a dear friend, the inspirational Robert Pekin, founder of Food Connect, the Food Connect Shared, Food Connect Foundation, and the Open Food Network. He was born and bred on a dairy farm in Western Victoria, and after spending a stint away doing lots of things, including being an aircraft maintenance engineer, he returned to the farm. But after losing the family farm and falling into a depression, he began imagining a different kind of food system and set about creating it with an amazing group of collaborators and his incredible partner, Emma Kate Rose, who's been a guest on our show before. What they've created is an inspiring, highly networked, localised, ethical and regenerative food system, one that nourishes growers, consumers, producers, the earth, and foregrounds Indigenous voices. Thinking differently about how we feed ourselves, how we source our food, is perhaps one of the most profoundly impactful actions that we can take. And joining with others to collectively do things differently, in fact, can change our way of being in the world and our impact on life in so many positive ways. I really hope you enjoy this conversation. I always feel uplifted and a huge sense of possibility when I spend time with Rob. We've been meaning to catch up on this podcast for ages, so I'm delighted we did. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the unceded lands from which I'm speaking with you, the Gubbi Gubbi, and pay my deep respect to their elders past, present and emerging. And I'd like to recognise their care for country, the waters and biodiversity for millennia. So make sure to check out the show notes for links to Rob's work and also for more information about the Permaculture Education Institute. Oh, and make sure to subscribe so you get notification of all our podcast episodes, and do leave us a lovely review, because it does indeed help the algorithms to find and share our little podcast. Well, thanks, Rob, for joining me on the show today. I'm calling in to speak with you here from the banks of the Mookaboolra River up here in Gubbi Gubbi country, and it's just an absolute delight to have you on the show. It's been a long time we've been talking about having this conversation, so welcome.
We have, yeah, we've been very busy. No, thanks, Morag. We were in Gubbi Gubbi country last week actually doing a healthy soil workshop up at Woombye. So that was, we just finished a series of 4 workshops with groups of farmers, about 80 farmers in total, and the last workshop was up in Gubbi Gubbi. But I'm talking to you from Turrbal and Yagara country down here on the Meanjin River, so-called Brisbane River in Brisbane. It's wonderful, and we've been so busy, but we have been having those monthly catch-ups with a couple of people across the nation, which have been really sort of just beautiful little sessions, no format.
Yeah, I think it's a really great way to keep in touch with people who are out in the world doing really incredible thinking and action and collaborative work, but to bring all of those people together, well, not all of them, because you can never get all of them together, but to have time when we make time to stop and have conversations and learn from one another. It's been really, really, really helpful for me too. Yeah. There's a lot of reasons why I wanted to have a chat with you and invite you to the show, Rob. There's a lot of things that you've catalysed. Like just as you were chatting before, you were saying you've been doing Food Connect for 17 years. Is that right?
I know. It seems it's gone in a blink.
Yeah, I know. I remember when you were first talking about it before you even started, and you were just starting up a few, prototypes of it. And I don't even know where that time's gone either. But what at the moment, right now, as we're speaking, we have around us news stories all the time talking about, cracks in the global food system. We're hearing spiking food. We're hearing stories of food shortages, global food shortages happening, and hunger. And I'm busy chatting with people in refugee settlements across East Africa saying, their World Food Programs cut their access to food by more than half. The price of their foods tripled. And so, this whole concept of relocalisation of our food system is kind of become an absolute paramount conversation to have. And this is something that you've been working with for a long time now. And this idea too that, I wonder that, there have been a number of different crises that Food Connect has gone through, like Food Connect. Maybe you could tell some of the listeners may not have heard of Food Connect before. Those who are more, Meanjin-based would have, or Australian-based would have. But if you could just describe it a bit, and then say how resilient it's been, like in the floods or the droughts, and what is it about the food system that has really worked, do you think? What about it's made it successful and robust?
Yeah, sure. I mean, and you're right. It is a lot of things are happening, and it's both a troubling time because of all the cracks are now really opened up, and we're seeing these escalation in whatever it is. Whether it's the price of fertilizer or the price of food or labour, all of these things. So it's a really critical time, and the model Food Connect is, it started out as a multi-farmer community-supported agriculture project. It was really my attempt as a pretty, busted-up dairy farmer, disgruntled with the world and how it worked, and then saying, well, if I'm going to do something, at a solution side of things, I have to address probably the biggest source of misuse of power, which is in the distribution side of things, and get in there and muck in with these bloody, won't mention their names, but these big monopolies here in Australia that are seen as pretty, ubiquitous and tame, but actually at the heart of it, they're pretty unconscionable organisations. So I thought, well, if me thinking, well, I've got nothing to lose, let's have a crack in that space. But it come out of a philosophy of Schumacher, so small is beautiful. So and Rudolf Steiner's principles around associative economies. Those two, well, that was sort of like the main philosophical sort of underpinnings. And there was obviously permaculture principles sprinkled through it in the early days. I did a permaculture course back in the 90s with David Holmgren. And a whole bunch of other sort of thinking I did between the time I lost the dairy farm and started Food Connect, which was a gap of about 7 years where I was fairly destitute and just doing, just living in a tent and wandering the bush and trying to figure things out for myself, because I was, as I said before, pretty traumatised by the experience of losing my farm. So we're a distributor mainly, and then over the years, as we've evolved, we've now got a community-owned shed. You can see the Food Connect shed banner. So 520 people own this building that I'm in, and there's 41 food-based entrepreneurs in here. Or not all food-based. There's a couple of businesses upstairs that are social enterprises, working with prisoners or working with, art and food, and really sort of interesting businesses in the space. And that's to provide this sort of infrastructure that's missing for food-based entrepreneurs who are pushing against the major system that externalises all those costs. We wanted to provide a roof over their heads where they felt, reasonably secure, and together we could lower the overheads on their businesses. And then the second function of the shed was to provide a space where people could gently bump into each other and collaborate on bigger projects. This is, and we'll get into this later on around this sort of using the metaphor of nutrient cycling in the roots of a plant. That whole symbiotic system when you regenerate a plant and the roots go down deeper, and and so the project at its initial phases was going, okay, these city people, they live in these capital cities. They only work 5 days a week, if at all. This is my judgment, coming from a dairy farm that my father fed to me, and that they were pretty sort of, were they up to a bigger game? Were they up for something that really, at a systems level, looked at food as though it wasn't, in a not for taken for granted role, and saw it as a human right rather than just a commodity. And lo and behold, it was a whole bunch of Brisbane mums who answered the call, and there was about 8 of them, and I hadn't even launched Food Connect, and I was really behind the scenes helping a couple of farmers get their head around this idea of community-supported agriculture and all of because it is quite a philosophical and economically different model, because it's based around true cost rather than the market, and it's around divorcing yourself from fossil fuels, or divorcing yourself from all of those inputs, and having a biological, or a geographical approach to where your food comes from. So people have a direct connection with, whatever it is. And it's utilising all these skills that are in the city, whether it's marketing skills or, accounting skills. There's a whole bunch of skills in the city that farmers don't necessarily have. And can we provide a business model where those skills can be utilised, and then the farmer can just get on and grow the greatest produce and not have to worry about that inside a business model where trust was built into it. And so you might know in the early days I wrote out a couple of conditions under which the business would run, and one of them was that the business was to be community owned. It was never to be owned by me. As I was building it, as I said, with those Brisbane mums and a whole bunch of farmers, and there was a whole bunch of other people who were invested. It might have been my idea, but that doesn't give me the right at some point in time to sell out or to benefit financially, over and above everyone else. The second thing I put into it was a mission lock. So whereby it was the mission of the company was preserved, and that was written into the articles into the Constitution. So I sort of hybridised a not-for-profit constitution and a for-profit constitution, because in associative economies, or in Christopher Horton Bubb's book, The Right On Corporation, the PTY Ltd is the simplest structure to regenerate companies, how companies should behave. So you sort of, how now companies, they basically have rights like a human. And so he said, well, let's not fight against that. Let's use that as a way of bringing responsibility and accountability to that entity that is now human, like we would do a parent over a teenager. But of course, capitalism has let the teenager loose, and now it's out there, ransacking the world and smoking lots of drugs and just going, it's just a bad teenager, a really, really bad teenager. But we've seen in the latest, election here in Australia with the independents coming to board. Emma and I sat down and watched 4 of the maiden speeches last night. These are really intelligent women, and they are going to put a lid on that rampant neoliberal idea of how the world works. I mean, it just isn't working. So, yeah. And then the third thing, I'm trying to think of the third thing that I put into because it's a long time ago when I set the sort of the 2-to-1 wage ratio. So I was I belonged to a big co-op. It wasn't really a co-op. It was a big demutualised, corporatised entity where the CEO was getting more than $1 million, and all us farmers are getting 17 or 18 cents a litre, and we're all farmers were shooting themselves because of the effects both that corporatisation and the deregulation of the dairy industry was having on us, which allowed the supermarkets to just do what they wanted to do. So that 2-to-1 wage ratio was so no one could earn any more than double the lowest paid worker in the business, and we've kept to that. And it's actually because when you get people who want to get employed by Food Connect and they say, I come off a whatever salary, 100 whatever it is, 150 grand, and I say, well, the highest we pay here is $36 an hour, and the lowest is about $23 an hour. You've got to fit into that. But the benefits are you're working with a company that's aligned with your values, and there's those sort of benefits, whilst not financial, are huge in terms of aligning oneself around a better life and stimulating and activating all of the faculties that are inside all of us. We're born with all of these innate ways of being, but capitalism and the society at large sort of tells us, no, you're not allowed to unleash those on the world.
Really interesting point, Rob, because, they're not the things necessarily that, well, you can't value them. They're kind of sort of just there, but by describing them and mentioning them as part of that whole, that, if you were working for a much higher thing but you felt dreadful about it, you would then have to go and find other things to kind of bring yourself back in. And so there's like the expense of that. And so this is it's different. It takes out a whole... Anyway, I think that's a really interesting point. And the other thing that you mentioned before that I don't know if you just want to talk a bit more about that, in terms of actually raising the money for the shed, for example, it's again different. Like you needed investment, but you did investment completely differently. And I think that was for me, it was a groundbreaking idea. I don't know where that idea came from. Had you seen it somewhere else, or is this a new thing? Or
no, I suppose I had seen it. Yeah, so I had seen it in other countries, but Australia didn't have the legislation to allow equity from retail, from everyday mums and dads to buy into a building like this. There's limits. You can only have 20 and you can only raise 2 million out of that 20. So it's very not 2 million. I forget what the law is, but only 20 people can invest. So when we finally convinced the landlord to sell us the building, we sort of went, we had no money, obviously being a social enterprise, and we'd already given him $1 million in rent. And we thought, well, if we can adopt this idea of participation, economic participation, because we're not going to change the food system until we change the economic system. And so, Emma was the main force behind we need to have this community owned. And so 2018, the legislation passed. Equity crowdfunding was now a legal tool. No one had done it yet. Fortunately, in Queensland, the Office of Innovation brought in a specialist from New Zealand, Anna Gunther, who ran a company called Pledge Me, and put her in what was called the hot seat for 6 months free of charge. And we fangirled her from New Zealand on the flight over and met her here, and Emma did the course. And it was very much no one had done it yet. What are we actually doing? How does it work? And ASIC were all over it. ASIC, the Australian Securities and Investment Commission, who are the legislative responsibility, they were all over us like a rash in terms of the document and, totally over the top. But, they wanted to make sure that someone didn't misuse this idea of basically, attracting investment from everyday mums and dads into a large building like this. So, it was an exciting campaign. We only had 90 days to do it, and we did it in the nick of time.
So how much did you raise and how many careholders did you have?
So we raised, 520 people own the building. We've now raised nearly 2.7 million. So initially we raised 2.116 million, which was enough for us to buy the building. It was 1.8 million. So a little bit left over to get some of the renovations fit for purpose for all these new tenants that had come on board during the campaign. But straight away after we raised the money, we had one investor come and say, do you want some more? And we said, 150. So we built some cold rooms and freezers and packing rooms and a whole bunch of other things. And that was just interest only and a debt equity swap in 10 years' time. So, all these sort of new financial ways they can do it. And then another group of retail investors, 18 of them come and saw us and said, what about we put a whole bunch of batteries and solar on your roof? We'd already had a bit. So they raised 80,000 in a sort of a special purpose vehicle around the same principle of separating the asset from the investment, and that'll be gifted to Food Connect in 10 years. And we set up a power purchase agreement. So all these these people are really knowledgeable in these instruments and also how to construct an arrangement where we're just paying out the debt of the solar and the batteries through our power bill, which is still at 15 cents a kilowatt. Hasn't changed, even though Australia has gone through this energy crisis. So it's made us really robust. And obviously having so many tenants and this model, this idea of having not just tenants who are food-based, but tenants who can sort of provide that diversity and ecosystem sort of culture.
Yeah,
That
that's what I
allows
want to ask you about. That, you know, is the waste from one going into the, like, how is there like that ecology of enterprises happening?
That's right. And embedded in that was, because when I started Food Connect, even though I was an organic dairy farmer and then a biodynamic market gardener, I wasn't, I wanted to just have good farmers. I didn't want to have a certification scheme that pitted farmer against farmer. So that flew against, and going to one of the trials we did have was convincing people that I just wanted good farmers. And that comes out of a farmer autonomously being given the opportunity to decide for themselves how they're going to run their farm. And, you know, going beyond organics as a result. A lot of our farmers drop certification and become beyond organic. And then the same here in the shed. We didn't put any rules. You know, we've had some hedonistic hot chili sauce makers who have come in here, totally just, you know, driving an Audi, just all the things that are, you know, that a bloke would do who's into chili and meat. And we've watched this person evolve into this beautiful human being who's now become, you know, the protector of all the women in the shed. I should add too, you know, out of the 520 investors, 84% are women, and something like 86% of the money is from women. Mm-hmm. So it's not like, it's a really different model. And as a result, out of the 41 tenants, I think 32 are women. Mm-hmm. So it's become this really safe space that quite a few of us are curated, where they feel like they're supported at a values level. I'll tell you an interesting story. We've just had our oldest entrepreneurs just started in the shed about 3 weeks ago. Cassie and Bree, they're sisters. They're in their 70s. And they've started a healthy dog food treat business called Bow Wow Treats, I think it is. And they are absolutely inspirational. Like, they spent 2 years researching this product, trialling all of the different flavours, using just plain old produce. And I bumped into them 2 weeks ago. And, you know, when I gave them the initial tour, and they'd never heard about Food Connect, and then they're doing the tour and I'm telling them it's owned by, you know, all the stuff that I just told you. And they got so excited, like they felt like we're at home, like this is the place we're going to, you know, start this business from and launch this business from. And for me, this is the symbiotic relationship, and for Jeff and for all the other people, having these two 70-year-olds who have had, you know, a hell of a life in the shed, you know, launching a business up against your rat bag, you know, Aldi treats and all the other crap treats out there is part of the magic that you know, inspires. It unfolds more faculties in you, because then you start to think about, oh yeah, wow, you know, why don't we, you know, we could actually do more for, you know, in Australia's system we've got women, not a lot of superannuation, you know, living in their cars. It's a real housing crisis, cost of living crisis. And what else can we do around women who, you know, because I certainly, you know, by the time I'm 70 or 80, I've got so much left to give. I don't want to be sort of, you know, left behind by society. So it's a space that does that to everyone. And obviously it's place-based, so it has this sort of culture around, you know, all the renovations we do in the shed. So we haven't knocked the building down and built a new one. We've used everything in the building. So it's a demonstration of how to regenerate an old building, repurpose an old building into something that's really funky. And we're seeing that a lot in the world today. It's also, we only use tradespeople and businesses from within 1 kilometre of this building, which has engaged all the other businesses who have always seen us as a bit of a hippie, you know, a bit of a lefty hippie organisation. And then they suddenly get a call and say, hey, listen, can you come and, you know, build this toilet, or can you come and, you know, help us renovate this wall or whatever it is? And they come in and then they suddenly get to know us at a relationship level and go, oh, these guys are bloody it's just common sense. You know, they go, oh.
Yeah. But you also have, you know, in the past, I'm not sure if you had recently with COVID and everything, but street parties and things to open up.
Yeah.
You know, you're in the middle of an industrial area, and that kind of thing has probably just never happened before. So you've brought this kind of vibrant culture into that space and to make a space where people can
we have lots of those parties. Nat, our events coordinator, she has fortnightly, you know, lunches and invites all the other businesses to come around. So it is. It has been a part of our sort of. I got that from my mum. My mum used to always say, it doesn't matter who's driving up the driveway, you know, offer them a cup of tea, you know, give them a chance to come in. I mean, they might be thinking of robbing the place, but after they have a cup of tea with you, they'll be thinking, oh, I'm not going to rob this place. They're really nice, you know. They gave me a cup of tea. So you know, that's sort of like, that's powerful stuff when you think about it, how society, and getting back to this sort of, you know, the city, you know, the thing I observed was, I had no idea, but the city is a really lonely place where no one is accountable to anything, really. I mean, certainly they are. And so, you know, the business model was using community drop-off spots rather than, you know, home delivery. I mean, home delivery is like giving soluble fertiliser to a plant. It's just saying, you stay there, we'll look after you, and they never participate in the broader game, you know, of how do we address biodiversity loss, climate change.
I think actually this is a really central part of your model, is the way that you have invited people and created spaces where people can participate. Like, I think that's the thing. Often it's hard to participate in the food system where in the current model it's like you can only be a consumer or a producer, but there's not much in between. So you've kind of opened this space and invited people to come and play in that space and to learn and to find ways to be an actor in that. And I remember something that you said a long time ago, something about we all need to be farmers of the future. It's like we can't just expect the 1% to do it. That we all need to be participants.
Yes, that's right. That was back when I was doing the research on what percentage of the population would need to be farmers in the world we're now starting to confront, and it was 15% at the time.
Yeah.
But I sort of broadened that term out, and I'm not a terribly intelligent person. But the one thing I did encapsulate was that word participation. That was my one principle, that if I can get people to participate with their skills in something they don't necessarily have anything to do with, you know, what magic could come from that. And so a bit like allowing people to self-organise around something they don't really know exists, and allowing those relationships and symbioses to happen, where I would just step back and, you know, I would coax them a bit. You know, obviously, I remember when our first farm letter writer, she didn't know she was going to be our first farm letter writer, but I was looking for an editor of the farm letter, and I'd always look at the bottom of the email and go, English teacher, ring. Hi, I see you've just bought a box off Food Connect. Hey, listen, I'm just wondering whether you would like to, you know, write our farm letter. And she went, oh, my God, I've never spoken to a farmer in my life. And I said, oh, no, it's all right, you know, I'll give you a couple of dot points and you just get on the phone with them and she said, okay, I'll do that. And she was really scared about this idea of ringing farmers and finding out, you know, having a conversation with them. But then, you know, I think it took them about 10 years and then they bought a farm. Like they eventually moved out to Kingaroy and become a farmer and through that. So you never know where things are going to go. So you sort of have to provide a bit of a boot up the bum, I call it, back in the day. You know, everyone needs a bit of a boot up the bum. It never hurts.
But
just to sort of
I'm just
push you into something. Yeah.
That, you know, that concept, though, of being afraid to speak to a farmer, like, isn't that, you know, just speaks to the split that we have?
Yep, that's right. And exactly. I mean, that's right. I mean, you reminded me of the other reason why I come into the city was I knew the city-country divide was a real thing. I mean, I exhibited all. I had all these prejudices and all these judgments about city folk. And so it was a challenge to me as much as to the city was, what can I step over in terms of my judgment to build a better world for everyone and get over some of my prejudices and you know, like, people see me now, my old friends see me now, and, I'm nothing like the person I was back, in the aircraft engineering days or the farming days.
So do you think then, in terms of building the relationships that you have, I mean, the strength of the network of farmers, producers that you've had, because you're speaking from that position, like I'm just thinking about like, how does this ripple out? How does the next one happen, the next one happen, and the next one happen? Yeah. The fact that you're speaking to people from that deep experience and the pain and knowing that of being a farmer and seeing a different possibility and to be able to speak, I guess, a language that resonates. Like how important has that been for the success of what you're doing?
Yeah, I think it's been incredibly successful. That idea that I never knew it all, so I never pretended to. So that gives people an opportunity to step into a space, and that certainly has caused pain, because we've had people who have come in and said, "I know more than you, and I'll tell you what to do." And we've listened to that advice, and a lot of the time it hasn't worked. So you got to be aware of where someone exploits, where you're giving them space to unfold their highest and best use. But for the most part, that I don't know what you call it. It's sort of like just giving. It's not being too tight around this is what we want to do. And because we didn't know what we were doing, like this had never been this multi-farmer CSA project where a whole bunch of mums come and they said, well, how are we going to do this? And it wasn't until the third week that the mums come to me and said, we can't go to that farm anymore. It's a whole day. We've got kids. We're getting late. But if you get all those boxes to our house, we'll provide that as a pickup spot for all the people who live around us. So that was the city cousin model was born then. And then we named it. And then a couple of weeks later, we're going, we've got to give you a name. And then in the middle of the night, I come up with this idea, country cousin, city cousin, And so that was born. So it's always been an iterative process and always having conversations and being very open and transparent when things, go pear-shaped, because together we've got lots of solutions. We can get together, but if you sort of hold it to yourself and you control it to yourself, there's no place where people can come in and participate and be a part of it. And importantly, grow the network, because it isn't about Food Connect. This was a project about something much, much bigger. Food Connect just become the business or the social enterprise. So now, throughout Southeast Queensland and lots of places, there's lots of sort of networks because it come out of us all having relationships and all doing our bit, but seeing where we're overlapping. Maybe we could do that together. We just did that, these 4 Healthy Soils workshops, and that was with Healthy Land and Water, Soil Science Australia, Food Connect Foundation was the one that got the money, and a whole bunch of volunteers come on board, and Soil Land Food, David Hardwick's organisation down in Albury. I must give a plug for David. He would be, and I've done a few healthy soil courses, he would be the most engaging and inspiring and informed presenter or workshop convener to a group of farmers I've ever seen. He is just a master. It is same sort of thing, real humble guy, he just knows how to engage and, poke and prod farmers into thinking. He gets them all to role play being a fungi or being a plant or being a bacteria or being a protozoa. So that, I had farmers come up to me during the course saying, wow, I've done a couple of, courses on this, but I've learned 10 times more in the first half of the day than I have anywhere else. So that got me excited about, obviously, because a lot of science is now demonstrating what we've always known about under the soil, that amazing, diverse biological system, or that cycles nutrients. And now we're seeing, where the new root tip, where a cell membrane or a cell comes in, and about 2 inches along, it gets stripped of its membrane, and then within 2 minutes, it's gone up to a corn plant or amazing plant, come back out, and at that point there, its membrane gets put back on and it goes back out with a signal from the plant that says, I need more of this or I need more of that. It's the whole world of soil science is now saying that symbiotic relationship and all of those organisms is in symbiosis with the plant, and then obviously the transpiration, and then even the bacteria now that's going up to the cloud, which is this small water cycles that's preventing the re-entry of heat from greenhouse gases. This is really, really formidable stuff. And it gets farmers excited because I often say to farmers, that you've got to drop the whinging bit and you've got to drop the whole, it's too hard. And yeah, it is. It is absolutely too hard. But when the crisis hits, they're going to be in the best position because they've faced all of those things. They've had to deal with nature. They've had to deal with not good prices. They're in a really, and they've had to engage all their faculties, at a systems level, even though they might not know it. And now we're at that space where now it's their time to rock and roll and their time to really sort of, I suppose, it's a really, obviously, and I think I might have spoke at the last thing we had our conversation where, the world has gone on this carbon tunnel vision for about 2 or 3 years, thinking that energy, if we move all our energy to renewables, everything will be solved. But of course, it's just one little part of the picture. Mm. And farmers are in this place now where they're being seen as, the whole soil, the whole land use sector has been completely forgotten about. Yet it's the most scalable solution to pretty much all of those grand challenges that we're looking at now. Yeah. So it's a pretty exciting time to be in the space and to be getting back to your question before about how do we do more of this, where people come out of a sense of agency in their region to put together models that are specific to their region, using the assets, identifying what the weaknesses are, what the strengths are, and out of their own volition, working with other communities, collaborating to do similar things. And that's and we're sort of seeing. We've been starting to tease apart the success of Food Connect, which hasn't been all that evident. I'm working with Sustainable Table and Tanya and Emma Kate, my partner, on how do we produce little small booklets that right. elevate that sort of those ideas, these principles, these little tweaks where people go, it's not some, you don't have to be some mythical higher being.
Fantastic. It's because you've done all this thinking around it and the experimenting and all the iterations you've talked about. I think there's some real, the essence that you can draw out of that to be able to say, look, here's some starting points. Not like the recipe sheet to copy and cookie stamp it. But here's the principles, the underlying principles, or here's like the links to these kind of resources, or why not think about these things? Well, here's the questions to explore to find how it's going to evolve in your area. So I think, that would be amazing.
I'm pretty
wanted to ask you too, Rob, about something that you do quite differently than most other enterprises, organisations I've ever seen, is how you foreground Indigenous leadership and wisdom. And I wonder if you could just speak to that a bit, please.
Well, that's been another, fumbling sort of a adventure and journey with, I always sort of knew and I was curious because when I lost the farm and then there's this wonderful part of my life where I was lamenting the farm in a big way, and my uncle told me to go to Tasmania and just get away from the whole, all of the memory and everything that was going on back on the mainland where the farm was and all that self-flagellation. And I was setting up camp on the northern part of Devonport, the closest to the, over the Bass Strait to my farm, and I was going to, say goodbye to my farm. And I'm pitching tent, and suddenly this Indigenous fella come out of the gloomy twilight and said, "You can't camp here, mate. This is this is a reserve. I went, "Oh, gee, I didn't know. Sorry, mate." Anyway, to cut a long story short, he sat down and we had this amazing conversation, and he sort of picked up that maybe I was in a bit of trouble mentally, and he listened to me, and he gave me all sorts of tricks and things to ask the spirits when I walked through Tasmania, and at the end of it, he said, "Listen, you can go down there. It's near the water. It's off the reserve, but just off the reserve, and you'll be looked after. You'll be fine." And so I pitched a tent there, and then the next morning I woke up with this amazing sort of epiphany or insight that, oh my God, here's, an Aboriginal person where we've sort of pillaged 2,000 generations of deep love for their land. And here I am having a big sook over my 4 generations and losing the farm. And I was really well connected to my farm. It had 2 volcanoes, one that was only 40,000 years old and the other one was 1.2, and they overlapped. And I was right into the whole farm. But out of that conversation and that epiphany the next morning, I realised, wow, why did he give me his time? What possesses him to be patient and listen to me dribble on about my bloody woes, and not at once talk about, not once did he say, "Oh, piss off, mate," He never did. And I thought, so that got me really curious. And over the years, I swore that when Food Connect, and we've been offered bush food from, various farmers and various sort of groups, and I said, I will never do any native foods through food. I will never sell them until I get permission. So I went on this quest of going to every Indigenous group, every Indigenous conversation, giving my pitch, how do I get permission, and being ignored for probably 10 years or so. And then suddenly a group of elders turned up at the shed here, and I poked Emma, I elbowed Emma, and I said, "Oh, here's my chance. I'm gonna do it again." And they just laughed at me. They said, "Oh, you're gamming us. You're never going to pay the rent." Like I was promising all these big things. I was really selling myself. Anyway, they said, "You can sell our foods. We know about you. We've known about you for years." And they bought into the shed. So this group of Indigenous. So this is the Watson family, Aunt Lilla Watson, who taught Mary Graham. And I didn't know at the time. Anyway, we got invited around for a cup of tea with Aunt Mary and Charlie, Uncle Charlie, her brother, and Tila, and all these people. And we had probably 4 hours, cup of tea, listening to them, and they gave us some profound knowledge that really was it's not easily accessible. And that was where I started to go, aha, my curiosity is now, I now know that their knowledge is going to get us through this. And we need to, because as a white person, you sort of go, you bring them to the table, but it's sort of tokenistic. And then you put them at the centre of the table because you want to make them a big part of the conversation, but that's also tokenistic. But where we need to put them is at the head of the table, telling us what to do with that philosophy and that amazing, wisdom and knowledge and experience that they have. It's extraordinary. And so now we're at that point. And that has been really profound in so many ways, and overlaps with some of the Schumacher stuff and some of the sort of distributionist theory from Hilaire Belloc and G.K. Chesterton and some of the stuff from Rudolf Steiner. But the big difference is that Indigenous law comes out of the land. Like they're given the laws through the land. That's a big concept for us, and it's taken me years to understand that. And I'll never say I understand it fully, but I now get it much better than I did back years ago. And I was listening to David do his soil workshops where he got everyone to role play, and I saw, oh yes, this is where all of those symbiotic relationships, and when you step back and give the plant the opportunity. Don't give it soluble fertilisers. Don't limit its growth. Don't get a cow in there and chop it down every time a green leaf appears. Allow it to grow. You'll get all this root growth. You'll get all these, this bacteria and all of these symbioses and things will balance. The nematodes will balance out against all the predators, this. And I was thinking, oh my God, that's what we're doing in the city. We're just stepping back and giving city people who have been given too much soluble fertiliser, and capitalism has stunted their growth in terms of their highest and best use. And now we can, and because of that, we're seeing all these relationships, they're becoming robust, not resilient, robust against all of the things that are happening in the world. Now, I mean, obviously we've got a long way to go, but that's how they would have been taught law, was through observing nature over millennia.
And so how has that changed how you run what you do as a business, as an enterprise? Enterprise?
So they've got about, I mean, when Aunt Mary and Aunt Lila taught us, it was like, there's like about, 10 things. So one of them, they never talk about equity. They always talk about balance. They never use the word equity. They always talk about balance, which is subtle but quite profound when you think about it deeply enough. So obviously, Aunt Mary told me, I had a session with her 2 weeks ago, and she said, we need to have 7, in governance and on boards, we need to have 7 women out of 10. That's how we rebalance things. So it's not about merit or equity. It's about bringing balance back to the world the world is. We need more women on all of these boards and all of these organisations because they've got that special ability. The other one is they always talk about the difference between power and authority. So, and autonomy. So the one about autonomy. So there's never the stick or the carrot, which is Western society runs by the stick or the carrot. It's like, I'm running away from something or I'm running towards something rather, whereas they always talk about autonomy, and you will, out of your own volition, come to a realisation about how you should conduct yourself, because so conduct is really important, and respecting elders and respecting children and seeing the children as the future inheritors, and how do I, all these things that we know, these tropes that we know about. But power and authority was the one that I really got. This is 3 or 4 years ago, how power is exerted in so many ways in Western society. And we just bought the shed, and here I was writing up all these leases. Not too many, because we weren't, we had a lot of space to build, and it wasn't filling up as quickly as I wanted. And I went to do this training called Black Card training in town here with a whole bunch of the Food Connect board and friends. And I went back and I'm thinking, oh my God, here we are writing up leases. A lease is a form of power. It says if you don't pay your rent, you're out. And the shed is meant to be this place where businesses, where we were removing the barriers for small businesses to come in and unfold whatever they want to do. And I'm writing a lease, so I scrapped all leases. And we went from about 7 tenants to about 20 tenants in about 3 months. It was like nothing at all. And I remember sitting with Tila, who's been taught by Aunt Lila mainly. She's sort of like the new elder, and she's only in her 30s. And Tila said to me, she might have only been 29 at the time. And I said, Tila, I don't know what's happened, but all this stuff's happened. And told her, that we weren't writing leases, and there was a couple of other things that I picked up from the Black Card course that I was now deploying or putting on the ground here at Food Connect. And she said, do you know what you've done? And I said, I've got no idea what I've done. And she said, and this was, she said, you've given people the opportunity to fall in love with themselves. And I went, come again? And she said, what you've done by allowing them to self-organise, having no lease, allowing them to come into the place and have 2 months where they could explore, get used to the space, just submit what hours they've done autonomously to me, so I'm not checking on them on their hours. They're self-organising around when they are leasing the kitchens. I'll never replace how beautifully Tila said it, but you've allowed their highest and best faculties, so their inner, you've stimulated that in such a way where they're now are becoming in love with themselves. And then what? Because you've given them the opportunity to be more than who they've ever been allowed to be before, because you've taken away accountability and responsibility. You said, no, you just operate out of your own volition, and because they call that obligation. So that their terminology is, there's no accountability, there's no responsibility, there's just obligation. All there is obligation, and that's up to you to decide who you're going to be obligating to. And I thought, oh my lordy, and she said that's what you've basically done. And because you've done that to the first couple, people are attracted to that. They tell their friends, they say, oh, I'm in this great space at the moment. It's so, like I'm not, I don't have to sign a 6-month lease. I don't have to, if I run late, I just ring them up and say, there's a lot of flexibility, and it's given me the opportunity to, find my niche in there. I even say, this might not be the space for you. You might at the end of this go, no, this isn't for me, and that's fine with us, So it's sort of saying to them, this is the boot in the bum bit, we might not like you either. Like this community might say, So it's sort of, it's is it empowering? It is empowering. It's sort of hinting that you can be a much better person than you are, and because you're going to be in community, you can't get there's no escape. Yeah. So your interpersonal skills have to sort of lift a couple of notches, and that allows people to fall in love with themselves, because they go, oh my God, I've got this insight about myself. Didn't know this about myself, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's fantastic. And,
so that's I think one of the,
it shifts to this idea of obligation. I think some people are afraid of obligation, whereas it is actually a liberating thing.
That's a really great way of saying it. Yes, that's true. I hadn't seen it in that way before, but I suppose by me doing this motion of unfolding your highest and best use is a form of emancipation, Yeah, or emancipation, I should say.
What was that?
Instead of emancipation, the word man, emancipation.
I thought you were talking about ferments there for a minute. Emancipation. I thought, it's that bubbling up.
Yeah. Unfolding. Yes, that's right. Liberating, because then it's a space, because that is transformative in itself, being given the opportunity, and non-judgment. So that's another First Nations thing, is we never judge, so that was another thing we had here. I sort of, oh my God, how many times do you judge someone? You just drop all of that. Just, allow them to be who they could be. Yeah. And
so Rob, what you've created, all of you together in all of your conversations and relationships, is quite extraordinary. I wonder what is your big picture of what you hope for, or where you would like this to go? Like you said before, like there are these enterprises that have come out of this, but there's something else that is fermenting through this process.
Yeah, and it's still it's obviously still based on that model of, give the plant the opportunity, the human, the opportunity to put its roots down deeper and grow, and see what that stimulates inside the food system. But the principles of small is beautiful, so obviously we don't want to get big. Some of the businesses in here will get big, but they'll be much bigger if they collaborate and then go for a procurement contract at a hospital or aged care centre or a child care centre. So, because that's the final frontier for humanity, is to get along, and to not be polarised, and to see diversity as something that adds value to your life, rather than seeing yourself as an entity that does, whatever it is, sauerkraut. And then I'm going to sell sauerkraut all over Australia. That's not the model. So we've still got a lot of work to do on that governance and those things I spoke about before. How do we reinforce them, and how do we sort of, well, not reinforce them, how do we curate them more and more so they're always, and they become deeply embedded, and more people exhibit those sort of, that culture of non-judgment and working with others, and and deeply growing as a human. And then obviously as Australia, because as we were saying, there's so many cracks in the Australian food system, that are starting to, they're really evident now. So having networks or food sheds, food hubs, whatever they are, whether they're virtual or physical, right up and down the east coast of Australia into South Australia, that are all networked together. So we have this, highly networked, distributed food system that have reinstated the logistics and the infrastructure, the value adding in the region. So, 70%, 60% of all food grown in a region is value added and sold in that region and eaten in that region. So that's an enormous readjustment, because that goes away from the big economic model what's that economic model where you just put mango farmers in one town and banana farmers in another town. It's an economic, it's an efficiency thing for a global food system, but it doesn't work for the food system we need in the future. So that'll give farmers the opportunity to go, oh, okay, so if I get rid of a bit of my banana farm and plant whatever it is, a vanilla crop, or and start to diversify their operation that can be used by these value adders in the town and then sold in the town, then they can see that as a pathway, because until people buy this stuff or are value adding this stuff, the farmers haven't got an incentive to grow it. So we've got to set up that side of things, and then farmers will go, oh, you beauty, I'll grow that, and then they'll grow more, and then they'll grow more, and then eventually probably, in the case of some of the sort of some of the more intensive products, they'll just drop by the wayside, because farmers they're utilising their land so much. And I mean, there's so many things inside of that around understanding, where their financial return is, that keeps them at a needs basis, not a wants basis. So there's just so much work to be done in that economic realm of needs. Actually, I've just ordered a whole bunch of Christopher Horton Budd's books. He's written a bunch more books to get my head into, because it's fascinating. The financial system is still exhibiting a lot of business as usual investment, even impact investment. Apart from a couple of groups like Sustainable Table and Haley, and a couple of really, really aware financial sort of intermediaries around the world, but it's hard for them. Slow money. I had a good chat with Woody Tash about 2 weeks ago. He's just written another sort of essay that really talks to this idea of how do we really seriously double down on our economic system so it exhibits these traits of if you look at the economic system, it's just been fed soluble fertiliser, i.e., really good returns. They don't have to work too hard for their money, and now we have a financial system that's out there doing all these unreal things that don't really serve society at all. So there's a lot of work to be done in that space. So the eater side of things, the value adding side of things, and the financial side of things have to sort of really lift their game to be on a parallel with all these regenerative farmers and all these permaculture backyard farming, community gardens and all. So the food side of things is really happening. We can see that. That's up and away and going really strong. But the work to be done in money, eating and value adding in unprocessed or not ultra or not hardly processed at all. There's a lot of work to be done in that space.
I wanted to just come back to that idea of the growing. I mean, I remember a long time ago we were having conversations around, how to protect and utilise more of the peri-urban land. And so after 17 years and, development still eating up lots of peri-urban land everywhere, where is your thinking around that, and what examples have you seen in terms of where are the future farms and who are the future farmers, and is there place to protect this land? What are the tools that we can use to help do that? And is urban farming part of the picture, or is it more the peri-urban? Are these a lot of questions all kind of
no, very good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great question, because we at our 10-year anniversary, Emma and I, after the 10-year anniversary, which was that street party, and 3,000 people come out, and we were going, holy, we thought we'd get about 500. We'd had this simple sourcing policy of, a 3-hour radius average, so we went 5 hours was the maximum. And we thought after that 3,000 people turned up, we thought, society is probably up for a more sophisticated conversation about where we source food from. And so we designed this new sourcing policy called the Brisbane Food Plan. And instead of the 5-hour radius, we said, well, let's embrace the whole globe and divide that into zones. So this is very much a permaculture thing. And then we divided all food groups into 13 categories, and we looked at them all through 4 lenses. Human health lens, because the eater public comes at food from all different angles. So we thought, well, what are the key, the key sort of reasons why people would buy something from Food Connect? And we come up with social justice, economic, ecological, or human health. So they were the 4 lenses. We looked at all those 13 food groups, and then we said, well, where should that food come from to meet those 4 lenses? And it was really interesting how it all panned out. And now our food miles is down to, even though we source products from now a broader, from as far, not as many, to satisfy that sort of, I suppose, diet, because we're trying to rebuild the diversity, because as you know, even though we might have potatoes and 5 or 6 varieties, like our plant diversity that we grow is so limited in terms of the mainstream eating of it. So we need to encourage that. So now it's down to about 80, 90 kilometres average during the winter time. And then in summer, because we go to Stanthorpe, it gets up to around about 130 kilometres average for all of our produce. So by opening up a more sophisticated conversation about where we should source food from, we identified, herbs, open-hearted lettuces, they all should be grown in your backyard or a community garden down the road, or a street verge garden or whatever it is. And then you've got your urban farms, so neighbourhood is a great example, market gardens in these sort of, underutilised urban spaces. And then you've got your peri-urban, and then you've got obviously, your out and out and out, where your meat should come from, where your milk should come from, all of those things through those 4 lenses. And that's one of the other things we're sort of now saying, well, this could be applied to any town or any city, this idea through these 4 lenses, using those principles. Because we can't determine whether it's going to be peri-urban or urban or whatever it is for any town. The town will decide that. They'll self-organise around, there's an opportunity down there. It might get flooded every year, or it might get flooded every now and then. So we'll do this there, So it's giving communities the agency to map their area, excuse me, look at the infrastructure that might be lying latent, and we've seen plenty of it. You go into a rural town and there's these, amazing buildings that would just retrofit with not a lot of money into an amazing space, but no one's really valued it that way. So then through them doing their own food mapping and given some tools, like Michael Schumann, you do that analysis of, are you a clone town or not? Simple things like that stimulate people into thinking, oh my God, I hadn't thought about, are these buildings, who owns all these buildings? Does the person runs a business inside that shop own the building, or is it owned by, lend-lease or is it owned by, and so gets them to think about what money is not staying in town because it's going into someone's pocket overseas or into the Cayman Islands or whatever else. So it really sharpens people's or educates people through that process around, I hadn't thought about these sort of things, hadn't thought about that as an economic multiplier. I hadn't thought about that that business down the road as whatever, And of course, asking those questions also brings a bit of obligation to someone who's sitting there and, a couple of community members come in with a notebook saying, oh, we're just doing this town analysis, we're just doing some food mapping. Now you own this pub. Where are all your salted peanuts coming from? And where, can you? And then they start to think, oh, God, I haven't thought about that before. I just have an agent walk in and, fill the fridge with Coke and fill this,
Yeah.
And so those sort of conversations by community people is of itself, like halfway there in terms of them starting to think about, well, what should this, and then think about it not go cold turkey. It's like, this is going to take a period of time, and we're not extremists here. We're not, it might be a radical idea, but it's not going to be actioned in a radical way. It's going to be action in a participatory way. Mm. So that's probably some of the cues or the keys. And obviously, like you do, highlighting in other parts of the world what communities are doing. That's always very inspiring when you see, towns who have gone from, before to after, and the community go, oh, my God.
It's possible.
That's possible.
I think it's just really kind of opening up to see, like you don't want to copy that, but, to be able to sort of go, oh, look, that bit of that, that's really inspiring, or a bit of that, and weaving them together somehow and just then finding your own path through it. I think that's so important to be able to do that.
Yeah, each bioregion has its own, biota and bacteria and fungi, and it's only up to them. They're the ones that are going to.
I love how you brought in this kind of the mycelial metaphor into everything, and it's incredibly powerful to reconceptualize who we are, where we are, how we function through that lens, I think. And the more we start to discover how it works, I'm in constant awe. And I think, every time I learn something, like I learned something from what you just said before, and then you go and you share that, because it's so new and it's so different from what we were taught at school. You go to school biology, it's not, but it's still not what's getting taught as well, which is kind of frustrating because it's, the curriculum's nowhere near where the reality is, and that's kind of disappointing. But I wonder, what I was just going to ask you though is, do you see support coming from governments or regulators or anything, or are you still seeing that as a squashing? Because I know this is part of that conversation for small farmers, small food enterprises, that there's sort of like this squeezing that happens, or do you feel like there's a shift that's going on?
No, and Gabrielle Chan's book, Why You Should Give a F About Farming, it really highlights some of those sort of that squeeze that you just mentioned then. I think, it's probably one of my blind spots, or I just haven't engaged with government myself enough to really understand. I think there probably is, because I did attempt to years ago and just got, laughed at and kicked out the door, what a silly idea. So I think there's probably more of an appetite to listen now. And I think now with these independents, with the new parliament now, like I was saying to Emma this morning, let's, give a few of these politicians, because, 3 Greens are in here in Brisbane and we're pretty connected to them. Let's use that as a door to open up conversations with all these other independents. Cathy McGowan, she would be absolutely up for this conversation if she isn't already. Surely. And she's in contact with all those independents. I know Anthony James, who does the Regeneration podcast, he's good friends with Kate Chaney. So I think it's a real opportunity for us to sort of because whilst they might be blind, they might be the word? I mean, obviously I don't know how Canberra works, but I can imagine the Labor Party going to go do their thing and engage with them and collaborate sometimes more at a tokenistic level. What else are they going to be doing while they're in Canberra? They're going to be meeting with bloody departments and policy heads and DGs. They're going to be they're intelligent women. They are going to be, prodding and poking and lifting the lid on so many things. So I think that's an opportunity for us as a movement is to go to Canberra and probably, or go when they're not in Canberra, and engage with them more around how policy. And the other side of it is we haven't probably yet established a comprehensive how this looks as an opportunity for Australia, to both the agricultural sector, which is, pretty powerful, very powerful lobbying group, wedded to the neoliberal idea. But I think there's probably an appetite within those organisations to sort of see this as a something that gives them more of a social licence. I mean, I often say all these farmers that you don't like, all these little, small-scale, free-range egg things and all that sort of stuff, they're giving you social licence. If it wasn't for them, you'd be, they give you the social. So you've got to reciprocate back and involve them in more discussions because it's only going one way. We know which way it's going. So I think for me, that's probably something I want to now step into a little bit more after so many years at Food Connect and demonstrating something or other, and probably now I think I've got a bit of credibility to be able to move into those conversations.
Well, maybe to host those conversations.
And to host those conversations.
To invite those people into a room together to be
to take out the polarisation, the GE and the anti-GE, to bring them into the one room. Actually, we were talking for a while about having what we call shed talks. So instead of TED talks, which is one person standing up with no chance for Q&A, we were thinking shed talks is where we have a panel of opposite sides, but there's rules around this isn't a debate, an adversarial debate. This is a conversation where we're talking and listening, and we're going to have a lot of Q&A, but there's going to be rules around the conduct by which we have this conversation, so we don't go into these sort of one side and the other side. We start to see the opportunities in embracing both. So I think that's, for me, that's where society needs to go, and I think these independents are going to do that a lot as well. They're going to be, let's have a conversation. We want to pick up the behaviour.
Yeah, and also to use the space of the shed too for, various sorts of, teach-ins of different kinds. Like you've got so many members and so many supporters who have so much knowledge just to keep bringing them in to be lifting up the whole. I think it's fantastic the way that you've woven all those pieces together. Yeah.
Well, we've got a great team here, and we'll, it's certainly not just Emma and I. It's, there's Jesse and Nat and Jeff and, the board who are, I better.
I just realised how much we've been chatting. It's been so fantastic to catch up with you again, Rob. Like there's always so much to talk about when I get together with you, and there's all the different dimensions of it. And I think, from the very practical, actually making it happen and creating real and viable and tangible solutions in that sort of iterative process you're doing, and really pushing the boundaries of what we normally ask of communities or farmers or eaters or businesses, and it's pushing those edges, and I think that's so inspiring. But then also this possibility for, because you're so grounded in that you become this sort of attractor where conversations can happen, because it's a real place to begin exploring
I think that's right. You get out of the head realm and into, how is this going to be applied on the ground? It sort of takes away, theoretical sort of opposition. It's sort of like, oh, well, actually, let's see how it works on the ground. That's the ultimate test. So for me, it's always been important that it's been an on-the-ground solution of ideas rather than just ideas in and of themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Morag. No, it's been wonderful to chat.
Thanks, Rob.
We don't do it often enough.
No, but please make sure that you send through a list of the different books that you've mentioned so I can share them with the listeners. Sure. And also I'll make sure that, so for those of you listening, I'll have that there. I'll send you all the links to Food Connect Shed, Rob's work, and any of those, the references. And also whether you have, is it accessible, the Brisbane Food Plan? That would be an amazing...
Yes, it is. Yeah, I think it's on the Food Connect Brisbane website.
Okay, great.
But if not, there's 3 websites. The Food Connect Shed one is probably the main... even if you just search Brisbane Food Plan, it'll probably come up. Yeah. It's a very crude document, but, you'll get... Sorry,
Rob. I was just going to say, I'll try and make sure I collect all the different great things you've been talking about so people can access that. Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, Rob. Take care.
No troubles. Right. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning into this episode of Sense Making in a Changing World. I'm delighted to be able to share my conversation with Rob Pekin with you. Remember to check out the show notes below for more links and leave us a 5-star review because it does help the algorithm notice and then share our show. And also make sure to subscribe too so you get notification of our weekly podcast episodes. I wish you all the best. Take care. See you next time.